What's up, everybody? It's Jared with Capture the Magic, and even though Netflix and Warner Brothers have entered into exclusive negotiations when it comes to Netflix looking to purchase Warner Brothers, and as I said in the last video, this is probably far from over, as Paramount is ready to head up a hostile bid going directly to the shareholders. And not only is Paramount looking to go directly to the Warner Brothers board, but they are looking to up their bid for Warner Brothers above $108 billion. And so more than likely, it's looking like this is going to come into yet another bidding war, as David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers, is probably looking to make yet another major payday for himself at the end of all of this. So we're going to go through, where does all this stand right now? How's it looking? And would the Netflix merger with Warner Brothers actually be approved as is? What are the chances of that? We're going to talk all about this and see where all this lies right now and where this may go going forward. So we have a few articles to look at. So the first one, here's some Deadline. And President Trump did speak directly about this in a way. He said, Donald Trump praises Ted Sarandos' confirmed meeting, but says Netflix, Warner Brothers would have, quote, very big market share and that could be a problem. That's for some economists to tell, and I'll be involved in that decision too, he told Deadline's Ted Johnson on the red carpet ahead of the Kennedy Center honors in Washington, D.C. He was in the Oval Office last week. I have a lot of respect for him. He's a great person, Trump said of Sarandos. Ted has really done a legendary job. He said the two had not discussed any potential guarantees in the case of the mega merger, which is ultimately unveiled on Friday. Netflix struck a deal to acquire Warner Brothers for $27.75 a share in cash and stock, beating out David Ellison's Paramount, Skydance, and Comcast. I think in the history of Hollywood, there's really been almost nothing like what he has done, Trump said on how Sarandos has built up Netflix. On market share, that's a question. They have a very big market share, and when they have Warner Brothers, their market share goes up a lot with the addition of HBO Max, and that could be a problem. The president remarks tonight were his first on the merger since Netflix emerged the victor. So there's lots of questions about whether or not this would actually be approved. That's where this is obviously going, but Netflix does feel rather confident in this, as they have put up $5.8 billion as a breakup fee if the deal fails to gain regulatory approval or if they back out of it. It will be pushing the argument that despite its size, it's only one player in a massive global video market, including YouTube, TikTok, and many others. And of course, with the news of that, as we talked about before, Paramount is not going away, and they're going to continue to try and acquire Warner Brothers. And this is from Charles Gasparino on Twitter X. It says, breaking news. As the New York Post first reported last week, Paramount is going hostile and will appeal directly to the Warner Brothers shareholders that its bid was superior to Netflix, and here will be their argument. The bid is all cash as opposed to Netflix's 85% cash, 15% stock split. The Netflix deal relies on the sale of Warner Brothers cable assets for as much as $4 a share to get to $30, and they're worth more than $2. Then its deal has regulatory certainty, whereas Netflix, as I have been reporting, doesn't. It says game on. And then on that, Paramount promises if they are to win Warner Brothers that they will release 30 plus films annually if it acquires Warner Brothers. It says we're going to satisfy the needs of the movie going public. So obviously off of the fears of Netflix, one of them being that obviously Netflix does not really believe in theaters. They think that's a dying model, and there's lots of worries that they are just going to completely abandon theater releases, which would obviously harm the movie industry, movie theater owners, everything like that. And that is yet another thing that is playing into all this outside of just the market share and how, would this become a monopoly if Netflix acquired Warner Brothers? And so basically, David Ellison's going to appeal to Hollywood on this to basically say they're going to put out these many movies. It says, should Paramount succeed in acquiring Warner Brothers, the combined studio will release more than 30 theatrical titles a year. This was Paramount CEO David Ellison's promise during a phone presser following the news of the conglomerate's hostile takeover bid for Warner Brothers Discovery. Such words mean a tremendous amount to exhibition and some content creators in the industry who have been fearful about a Netflix-Warner Brothers marriage. Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos spoke about his commitment to theatrical if the streamer acquires Warner Brothers, but he hopes to, quote, evolve the window to meet consumers' demand for content. And I've said the entire time, Netflix can say whatever they like, but I do think they look at the theater model as that's a dying thing and that's not important to their business model. And so how long would they really retain traditional theatrical windows or release windows? I think that's a major question when you are looking at this. Netflix recently dropped the ball on the theatrical releases for Rian Johnson's threequel, Wake Up Dead Man, Knives Out Mystery, failing to book the top 3 theater chains due to a lack of a 30-day window. The movie did substantially less in its limited release, over $4 million in its 5-day Thanksgiving launch, versus when Netflix had the chains on board for the franchise's previous chapter, Glass Onion, which grossed $13 million plus. Said Ellison on the phone this AM, including the Writers Guild of America, have already issued a statement that a deal must be blocked. Hollywood legends like James Cameron and Jane Fonda have spoken out, describing the Netflix deal as a disaster for theatrical films. Paramount's proposal provides vastly superior certainty and projections for Warner Brothers shareholders and the Hollywood community. Paramount is committed to growing the film and TV output of both businesses, including a theatrical slate of 30-plus theatrical releases per year. Says, we're going to satisfy the needs of the movie going public. While Sarandos didn't specify the length of the window that Netflix would strive for in a post-Netflix Warner Brothers world, sources with knowledge of the situation say that the streaming boss has been pushing a 17-day exclusive theatrical window versus the 45-day window that the top 3 circuits crave. Netflix has been essentially stunting with theatrical of late. Sarandos went on to say, we've released about 30 films into theaters this year, so it's not like we have this opposition to movies in theaters. And Sarandos said this on a call with Wall Street, fresh off clinching a mega deal to acquire Warner Brothers. However, none of these movies, except for K-pop Demon Hunter's Sing-Along, have been wide releases. Netflix movie titles are limited releases and typically serve the purpose of qualifying for Oscars. My pushback has been mostly in the fact of the long exclusive windows, which we don't really think are that consumer-friendly, Sarandos added. The negative impact of this acquisition will impact theaters from the biggest circuits to one-screen independents in small towns in the United States and around the world, exclaimed Cinema United president and CEO Michael O'Leary on Friday in response to a potential Netflix-Warner Brothers merger. Netflix's stated business model does not support theatrical exhibition. In fact, it is the opposite. Regulators must look closely at the specifics of this proposed transaction and understand the negative impact it will have on consumers, exhibition, and the entertainment industry. This mega deal between Netflix and Warner Brothers would risk removing 25% of the annual domestic box office if films that are traditionally given a robust theatrical release by Warner Brothers disappear from theaters. Netflix currently grants only a handful of their films a token theatrical release. Now, where this gets really interesting is not only is Paramount looking to go directly to the shareholders, and they're looking to release 30-plus movies per year if they're able to get Warner Brothers, they're actually upping their bid quite a bit. So Paramount today announced that it has begun an all-cash tender offer to acquire all of the outstanding shares of Warner Brothers Discovery for $30 per share. An operation, it says, equates to an enterprise value of $108.4 billion.
Whoa, this is getting kind of pricey.
Their play calls for the entire Warner Brothers Discovery, Linear Networks et al. Versus Netflix I for Warner Brothers Studio, theatrical and TV production, and HBO Max streaming service. The Netflix deal for Warner's is worth $72 billion in equity value, with Warner Brothers selling assets to Netflix for $27.75 a share in cash and stock. The Warner Brothers Netflix union is pending regulatory approval, with the transaction happening post-Warner Brothers breakup. So Paramount is willing to pay over $100 billion to get this, which this is getting into just the stratosphere of how much people are going to end up paying for Warner Brothers to acquire them. And David Ellison also spoke about this on CNBC this morning. We'll take a listen to this.
Our offer is $30 a share, all cash, $41 billion in equity that's backstopped by the Ellison family and Redbird, $54 billion in debt with commitments from Citi, Bank of America, and Apollo. We have faster regulatory certainty to close, and our deal is pro-consumer, it's pro-creative talent, it's pro-competition, and we believe that when you actually, to further contextualize, our $30 in cash, $30 a share, is basically $17.6 billion in cash more than the $23 in share that they signed up.
Right. You're not obviously paying. You're paying for Global Networks. Their deal doesn't involve paying for Global Networks, which are traded as its public company. Which, by the way, also figures very prominently here in trying to determine what the overall value of the respective deals are. Because there are $27.75, including obviously the stock portion of their deal, but it also includes, well, what's Global Networks? Is it a $2 stock? Is it a $4 stock? What do you see? Because that can go a long way in terms of at least determining why the board may have said, no, we think Netflix is superior.
So respectfully, we think that basically that's valued at $1 a share. I think if you
Why
look,
$1?
so if you look at Versant and where the median of all of this is, it's about 4.5 times. You have to get to 5 times equity value or more to basically get to the kind of $3 plus that you're claiming. But again, I think the most important thing to go back here is, look, we're sitting on Wall Street where cash is still king. We are offering shareholders $17.6 billion more cash than the deal that they currently have signed up with Netflix. And we believe when they see what is currently in our offer, that's what they'll vote for.
So again, the Ellisons are willing to buy the linear assets, and the discussion there is how much is this spin-off company that Warner Brothers is forming that involves these linear assets, how much would that be per share, which one would assume linear assets, the reason they're spinning these things off is because they are just a depreciating asset. It's like a melting iceberg. And so they're saying, or the Ellisons are saying, it's worth $1 a share. There are some people saying it's worth $2 or $4 a share. But either way, it's not like you'd be buying a stock that would continue to go up. I do believe is going to be their argument here, and really saying, $17 billion more to the shareholders as a whole probably is a pretty valid argument that they're going to try and take directly to the board. Now, in terms of the likelihood of a Netflix-Warner Brothers merger being approved, the first little tidbit we got about this, whether or not this would be approved by the regulators, this came from Culture Crave, which was via Charles Gasparino last night. And it said a Trump admin regulator says, quote, Warner Brothers is far more likely to collect its $5.8 billion breakup fee than getting this Netflix deal through the regulatory process. So obviously off of that, at least the initial thoughts, and again, we don't know which person said this or anything of that nature, but if they're already looking at this and saying these, this type of verbiage here, I've said the entire time, not that this Netflix Warner Brothers deal wouldn't go through. I just don't think it's going to go through if it happens as it currently stands. I do believe that they would make some major alterations to this agreement, given how big it would make Netflix. You're talking about the number 1 streamer acquiring the number 3 streamer versus Paramount, which is not even in the top 3 or 4, acquiring the number 3. It's not as much of a potential monopoly issue. And the same you could say for Comcast, which I don't think Comcast is really in the running for this at all at this point. But Comcast with Peacock is way down that list. So if they were to acquire Warner Brothers and the streaming assets, it wouldn't have as much of an impact as Netflix doing it. I think that is the major thing here, outside of the theatrical releases and what they would do with that. And that's where Hollywood's worry is. But on the streaming side alone, I think it's where most of this conversation is going to be made about whether or not this comes into monopolistic territory with Netflix acquiring HBO Max. And there's a little bit more on this from the New York Post. It says, why Paramount Skydance may not have to go hostile to thwart Warner Brothers Discovery's merger with Netflix. It says Paramount Skydance and its deep-pocketed owners David and Larry Ellison may not have to get that hostile to thwart Warner Brothers Discovery merger with Netflix. It says, in the days since Netflix won the auction with its $72 billion bid for the Warner Brothers Studios and HBO Max streaming service, Warner Brothers wily CEO David Zaslav has signaled to close associates he can envision the Ellisons upending the monster deal with a higher bid, sources said. Listen, David Zaslav, say what you will about him, he's a savvy guy, and he is looking to make an absolute mega payday out of all of this. So he is not going to be turning down higher bid offers if that's what's going to end up happening here. And I think you're definitely seeing that happen. So specifically, Zaslav sees an agreement in which the Ellisons raise their bid enough to cover the $2.8 billion breakup fee that Warner Brothers would face if it walks away from the Netflix deal, according to people with direct knowledge of the matter. Zaslav's thinking is that the Ellisons could come back with a $35 per share all-cash offer that covers the $2.8 billion breakup fee. And then he has to go get in a room and decide which offer is best for shareholders, and the Ellisons own it, says someone with direct knowledge of Warner Brothers chief's thinking. Zaz, as he is known in media land, is said to have seen the Ellisons' intentions coming. He knows the Ellisons, Larry in particular, who has amassed a fortune of more than $250 billion with his deal-making prowess in Silicon Valley, weren't going away quietly. That's when he sent out word for a few more bucks. Warner Brothers could be theirs, these people added. How much the Ellisons are willing to raise their bid is unclear. Monday morning, David Ellison said he would have gone higher than his $30 a share before WB announced Netflix the winner at $30.75. But in going hostile, he is signaling to Warner Brothers shareholders that he and his father's all-cash bid of $30 a share or $78 billion is still superior to Netflix's $27.75 a share offer. And as well in the hostile bid, Charles Gasparino just shortly today said that breaking Paramount and their board is meeting as I tweet, and my sources say the company is weighing whether it will bid higher than $30 a share for Warner Brothers or just take the $30 a share offer to the shareholders. The consensus is that they will have to go higher on a hostile bid. Story is developing. So it definitely seems that Paramount is almost hell-bent on getting Warner Brothers, and we're already talking upwards of $100+ billion to get this. If they're going to go higher than $30 a share, this is going to continue to go higher, of course. What's probably going to end up happening here is Paramount's going to up their offer and either get Warner Brothers to exit out of this deal with Netflix or force Netflix to have to up their bid. So either way, I think it looks like if Netflix is going to get it, they're going to end up paying more for this, or if Paramount gets it, either way, it's going to be a higher price than what was already there. So even though technically the auction is over for Warner Brothers, it's not really over, and Zaslav knows this. And essentially, it's just trying to even get more money out of this. Now, the big question people have about this, of course, you look at, Disney bought 20th Century Fox, and, people are saying, well, a lot of these mega deals have been approved. And what's the difference between this Netflix Warner Brothers deal and previous mergers that we have seen in recent years with, Microsoft and Activision and other ones as well? I will note those did require, some concessions along the way. So that's one reason I think if Netflix does end up with it, that there will be some sort of concessions made, because I just don't see it going through as it is. Now, I am not an expert on any of this stuff in terms of mergers and anything government approval. I'm not going to claim to be, but I did go to ChatGPT and I just asked it, what are the differences here between you're looking at when Disney bought Fox versus Netflix looking to buy Warner Brothers? What would be the potential issues here? What is the difference between these two different mergers? So basically it comes out and said that the Fox deal with Disney, this deal was looked at as horizontal, meaning two studios merging content libraries and production assets. Hollywood at the time had several major competitors: Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal, Paramount, Sony, plus emerging streamers. Even post-merger, Disney did not fully dominate any critical entertainment market. Movie box office share was high, but not monopolistic. TV streaming market was fragmented, and cable and broadcast were still significant. So basically, they said the regulators believed that competition would still remain. With Netflix and Warner Brothers, Netflix is already the largest streaming service in the world with dominant market share in subscriber count and streaming hours. Warner Brothers owns HBO Max, Warner Brothers Pictures, DC, a huge TV catalog, CNN, Cartoon Network, Warner Brothers Games, etc. A purchase like this creates a vertical and a horizontal mega conglomerate, tightening Netflix control over production and global distribution. Regulatory scrutiny would be dramatically higher today because streaming is effectively the new central entertainment market. I think the thing to keep in mind here of what the regulators will probably look at is what's considered the horizontal integration or the vertical one. And if they view Netflix and Warner Brothers as a vertical one, I think that is where they can run into some issues getting this approved. It says Disney and Fox were both content producers, not dominant distributors. Vertical power was low. Netflix is the dominant distributor in a fast consolidating streaming market. So you throw in producer of Warner Brothers plus dominant distributor in Netflix, competitors Amazon, Apple, Disney, Comcast, Paramount could face restricted access to key content or higher licensing prices. Netflix could self-prefer Warner content in search results, thumbnails, recommendations, and antitrust hotspot in digital markets. It says regulators aggressively police vertical integration in the digital era. I talk about Microsoft, Activision, Amazon investigations, etc. Also, when Disney bought Fox, the government still believed in the Big Six studio system. Streaming was fragmented, and there was no clear dominant force, and that was back in 2019 versus today. The streaming market is consolidating around Netflix, Amazon, and Disney. Warner is one of the only major studios that can counterbalance Netflix in terms of prestige content. Removing Warner from the competitive landscape could be viewed as significantly harming future competition. So antitrust regulators, especially under current enforcement posture, are far more aggressive. And then on the topic of, changing this deal, so when Disney bought Fox, the DOJ did force Disney to sell off Fox's regional sports networks. And then this resolved a major competition issue, which was sports broadcasting rights. With Netflix Warner Brothers, there is no simple divestiture fixes as the core problem because the harm is systematic, streaming dominance plus content dominance, and regulators can't carve out HBO or DC without gutting the entire deal. The deal would be seen as creating a super dominant entertainment gatekeeper, something regulators are actively trying to prevent. So I went ahead and asked it, what are the chances of this Netflix deal being approved? And it said, as it currently stands, it has a 5 to 15% chance of approval, and that's being generous. They go on to say current antitrust enforcement is hostile to big tech consolidation. Netflix would become a super dominant player overnight, the number one streamer absorbing one of the last true competitors, taking control of HBO, Warner Brothers Pictures, DC, Warner Brothers TV, games, etc. A full content pipeline plus distribution pipe that 260 million subscribers rely on. Basically, that's a content foreclosure risk, massive antitrust red flag. The DOJ already regrets letting Disney Fox happen. Public statements from antitrust leaders in the years since have criticized that approval in hindsight, and they are likely not to make that mistake again. It says best case for Netflix is a 15% probability of approval. More honest assessment is 5 to 10%. If the political wind shifts or Netflix offers major concessions, maybe 20 to 25%. Chance of getting it approved as is with no divestitures is under 10%. So they went ahead and asked it as well, what are the chances of Paramount and Warner Brothers getting a deal to go through? They estimated the approval chance there is 40 to 55%. Said it's not a slam dunk, but it's far more realistic than a Netflix-Warner Brothers merger and falls into the possible but heavily scrutinized category. Says neither company is dominant in any critical market. Says neither one is the Amazon, Disney, Netflix type threat regulators usually worry about. They're mid-tier players trying to survive consolidation. Says market consolidation argument works in their favor. Paramount and Warner Brothers could genuinely and truthfully argue we need to merge to compete with Netflix, Amazon, Disney, and Apple. Without this, we cannot survive. That's a pro-competitive argument. Netflix cannot use that argument because they aren't struggling. But they do say the one big antitrust risk is fewer major studios. A merger would basically shrink Hollywood's landscape from the big six to the big five and having Disney, Universal, Sony, Netflix, and Paramount, Warner Brothers. Regulators would definitely look at box office share, TV production concentration, and effects on licensing and content bundling. But it says the biggest regulatory concern would be sports rights and cable footprint. Warner owns TNT, TBS, a bunch of those. Paramount owns NFL. They also now have the rights to the UFC. So there'd be major concerns about raising prices for cable bundles, controlling too many sports rights, and local affiliate leverage via CBS. So basically their assessment is Paramount Warner Brothers odds would be 40 to 55%. If they agree to partial divestitures, which would be very likely, it would be a 60 to 70% chance. And compared to Netflix and Warner Brothers, Paramount is dramatically more likely to pass because no dominant distributor is being created, no tech platform vertical integration, no content foreclosure risk, and more of a survival merger than a power consolidation. So obviously, who really knows how this is going to play out? But I do think that when you look at that, I think when you're looking at the landscape of this, you already have the administration saying that Warner Brothers is much more likely to collect that $5 billion breakup fee than they are to get this approved. Even President Trump himself said that makes up a pretty big market share. We'll have to take a look at that. I think the chances of this going through for Netflix and Warner Brothers is not the strongest. I actually think there's a lot of issues with that. And I think as well, you're talking about, you're going to have Hollywood, you're going to have both sides of the political aisle that are already going out against this. There's going to be a lot of pressure and really public support to deny this deal going through. And so in many ways, this could be looked at as an easy political win by denying this. That would appease a lot of different categories. And then this would open up to either Paramount going ahead with their hostile bid. Maybe that happens anyways. But I think Paramount has a better shot of getting this approved than Netflix does. But personally speaking, I still think the better thing to do here is to break up Warner Brothers into pieces and sell it off in piecemeal. Have, studios bid on various different properties. Somebody gets maybe Batman, Superman, or DC rights, whatever it is. I think that would be a better way to go about this than having either Netflix absorb Warner Brothers or Paramount absorb them, because either way, you do have antitrust issues. I would just say the least amount of antitrust issues would fall with Paramount compared to Netflix. But either way, whatever the chances are, this is not over, as Paramount is going to be upping their bid, again, going above $100 billion. So this is far from over, and we're going to continue to see this play out probably at least for the next 10 days. As that's what Zaslav said, that they would respond to Paramount's hostile bid and see what happens here. Either way, it is going to get more expensive and very interesting. And I think there's a lot on the line here. And a lot of people, including Hollywood and many people that are worried about the theater experience, are definitely concerned about Netflix getting a hold of Warner Brothers and what that would mean for the movie industry. But that's kind of where all this stands right now. Netflix and Warner Brothers are in exclusive talks, but Paramount is not going away and very likely could end up raising enough money to pay for Warner Brothers' breakup fee and also end up with Warner Brothers. David Zaslav is going to make a ton of money off this deal. And at the end of the day, somebody more than likely is going to end up with Warner Brothers unless there just is some sort of overall thing saying we're not going to let anybody buy Warner Brothers and go through some other process. No evidence that that is the case right now, but these things will take time. And once whatever is actually approved and finalized, it's still going to go through an investigation. It's probably going to take a year or longer before a final determination about whether or not a deal for Warner Brothers is allowed to go through. So this is far from over. There's going to be some twists and turns. And whenever there is news about this, we will talk about it here and let you know about it. But for now, that is going to be it, though, for this video. So if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel as we do lots of coverage here of theme parks, entertainment, and pop culture. And let us know in the comments, who do you think is going to end up with Warner Brothers? And until next time, we will see you later.